Right, year 10 and 11, you both have this walking talking mark in your revision pack. It's based on the Aberfan mine disaster. So you can listen to me while you go along and complete it, or you can complete it independently if you so wish, but I would advise listening to my advice. Okay, so this year I have adjusted the timing ever so slightly, just purely because we haven't had the same practice as in previous years. So question 1, which is worth 4 marks, which is the true false statement, you get 5 minutes to do that. Question 2, 15 minutes to summarise the 2 texts. Question 3, it's worth 12 marks, but I'm still only giving you 15 minutes because you should be better at this skill because it appears on both papers and it's very much a literature kind of style response, analysing language. Question 4 is worth 20% of the marks on the paper. You get 25 minutes to do that. And I have shortened question 5 down to 40 minutes. We've borrowed 5 minutes to put onto section A. Okay, so just a reminder of what the question is. So it's the same. Some of the questions are very similar to paper 1, but this one has 2 texts, which does make it more complicated. So don't underestimate this paper. So question 1 is the true false one. So it's very much like paper 1 Q1, but you're given 8 statements and you have to choose 4 true ones. They could potentially be false. They are typically true. Question 2 is the summary one. This is the one that I joke about in class. It's the Will Smith question. Get language features out of your mouth. You are not talking about language features. You are summing up the content of 2 texts. So comparing the attitudes to a boat or surfboards. Okay, or the weather. So it's very much just summarising. You're not analysing language. Because question 3 is the language question. It's exactly the same as paper 1 question 2. And it's worth more marks. Question 4 is a comparison question. It's very much language and structure, but how are the writer's feelings presented through language and structure? And question 5 is the writing question, and you're writing to argue, you're writing to persuade. Okay, so first things first, pay very close attention to the insert on the source page, okay? You can either read the sources together and spend 5 minutes actually reading the sources at the time, or you can absorb that into your questions. Pay very much close attention to when the sources are from. So source A here is 20th century, which means it's modern, and it's written in 1967. When you see the date, be thinking about what you know about that era, what happened in that era. It will help you place it, what was life like in that era. Source B is 19th century, an extract from Victorian newspaper article. I always say when we get 19th century, is it more of a Christmas Carol or is it more Titanic? So remember, Titanic was 1912, A Christmas Carol was late 1890s, so we know it's before A Christmas Carol, so that should help you frame your ideas. So let's start with section A, reading. Okay, so question 1 is worth 4 marks. It's worth 5% of the entire paper. You're spending about 5 minutes on it. You're choosing 4 correct statements. You're shading inside the correct box, so please refer to my masterclass if you're not sure what that looked like. If you make a mistake, put a clear cross through it. And you could be looking at explicit or implicit information, but you need to read it very carefully. So you should read the source, particularly the section that's outlined. Look at the line numbers, make sure you're answering from those line numbers. It goes in the correct order of the line numbers, and read the statements very carefully before selecting your answers. So remember, my advice is on the left hand side is always make an initial track of your thoughts. Okay, so just a little reminder again here of what the question would look like in the orange box. A little acronym if you need it. Bug, box off the text, underline the keywords in the question, glance back at the question as you look. Remember to follow the instructions that are in the purple box. Remember, thousands of candidates lost 4 easy marks on this question because they ticked or crossed and they didn't pay attention. Remember, this is scanned through a computer. A human being does not do this question. Okay, so pause the video now and have a go at this question. Check your line reference. Choose the 4 statements which are true. Do not shade the boxes or shade outside the box, or tick or cross. You want to shade the little circle. Time yourself 5 minutes from now. Have a go at that question. Okay, question 2 is worth 8 marks. It's worth 10% of the entire paper. You should spend about 15 minutes on it. The question will ask you to look at both sources. It is testing your understanding of the ideas in the text, not the writer's choices, so do not analyse how it is written. You want to use comparative connectives like similarly, in contrast, on the other hand, things like that, and use words that make it clear you are looking at inference. This highlights, this suggests, this shows. So you want to pick 2 or 3 main differences between the texts. You want to include quotes, try and embed them within your sentences. Do not analyse language. So just a reminder, you get 15 minutes on this question. It will look very similar to what you see in the orange box there. You need to refer to source A and source B for this question. Write a summary of the differences or similarities between, and it will list that. You do not need to analyse structure. You very much just write in inferences. I call this SQI, statement, quotation, inference, comparative connective, statement, quotation, inference. Okay, do not talk about the differences caused by the time periods. Stick to the focus of the question. You will get 15 minutes to have a go at this. Okay, so what does AQA say about this question? So the key difference between candidates is the quality of the inferences they've made. We've talked about this on paper 2, question 3, and language. Candidates in this higher group frequently use topic sentences to ensure that ideas are clearly and consistently focused on the question. So they include the words from the question in their statement response. Okay, so you make sure that you're using the words from the question. They're going to use a very clear paragraph structure. They're going to make a statement, they're going to include an embedded quotation, and they're going to use phrases like this suggests, this highlights, this indicates. Strong candidates demonstrate a confident understanding of both texts, so they talk about both in detail, and they make original and perceptive statements about the differences. One of the main problems is candidates' ability to remain focused on the question throughout the response. You want to sound like a broken record. Stick to the wording of the question. Weak candidates write irrelevantly or discuss techniques, word classes, or bit of the text not asked about. Do not talk about the language techniques used. Just talk about the information you have learned and make inferences about them. Okay, so let's just have a practice here. So list 2 differences between the places in the text, Aberfan and London. Just do it based on the pictures. So whilst Aberfan is set in the country, London is a city. Okay, whilst Aberfan is this, London is that. Whilst Aberfan has this, London has that. Okay, pause the video now and give that a go. So the next thing you want to do from your listing is you want to make inferences about the things that you've listed. So here you can see mine. So I've taken the 2 boxes at the bottom, which is the information in the text. Few people had ever heard of Aberfan until disaster struck it, and in London we are situated on a deep bed of clay, and this is what my response would start to look like. Aberfan is a small village that few people have heard of. It is tucked away in the Welsh Valley. This suggests that it is almost hidden from view and would have been similarly forgotten in history had it not been for the tragedy. So there's my clever inference. In contrast, there's my comparative. London is described as a colossal city. It implies it is huge and filled with activity, a place that is so large that it should be safe from natural disaster like an earthquake. So this is what effectively you are going to do. Okay, so you're making a point that picks out the differences between the text. In terms of Aberfan, one is a small town, one is a large city. You then want to put in a quote that backs up what you're saying and an inference about that. You then want to make a point about text fee, remembering to use the information from the question. You want to put in a quote and make an inference, and then can you make a link between them at the end? So this is an example between two festivals, so it's worth pausing the video now and having a look at that before we move on to the actual question. Okay, so here's the question that I want you to have a go at. You need to refer to source A and source B for this question. Both sources give details about the places where the events occur. Use details from both sources to write a summary of the differences between Aberfan and London. You're looking for 2 to 3 integrated comparison paragraphs using SQI. If you need some inference phrases, we've got some here at the bottom: intended, implies, perhaps, and we've got some comparative connectives on the other side, although also in the same way, unlike, if you do need those. Pause the video now, time yourself for 15 minutes and have a go at that task. Okay, so question 3 is worth more marks. It is worth 12 marks. However, I've only given you 15 minutes because it is exactly the same as Q2. It's a very familiar skill. You shouldn't need longer. So this one is based on source B. Look for the line numbers and the keywords in the question. Make sure you're answering on the right bit. It's asking you to analyse how language is used. That means words, phrases, language features, literary techniques, sentence forms that the writer has deliberately used for effect. You must use terminology like noun, complex sentence, verb, metaphor, verb phrase. But remember, do not device pick. That's not what's important. You have to identify the techniques used by the writer, explain them, and talk about what is inferred by them using those techniques. Okay, so you should be using the word the writer or the author's name and the word reader in your answer. This makes the reader feel, this indicates the reader, this suggests to the reader. You want to pick out 4 or 5 interesting use of languages to get those top marks. Use tentative language, perhaps, maybe. Select relevant quotations to support your points, relate to the question, zoom in on individual words. If you're unsure what this question looks like, head to the Paper 2 Question 3 Masterclass on this playlist. So just a reminder what it looks like. You want to use the bug technique again, box off the text, underline the keywords in the question, glance back at the question, make sure you're answering that question. It will always look like in the orange box. It's exactly the same as Q2 on paper 1. You're looking at writing 3 what, how, why paragraphs, and overall in the end, if you've got time, identify language techniques, zoom in on words, and you're using what, how, why, focusing on the effect. Talking about the effects of the reader in detail. These are some of the language features that you might want to talk about. So if you're not sure what some of these are, pause the video now and look them up, or how many of these techniques can you pick in the next question. This is a very simple what, how, why. Okay, so the writer shows they use this quote, the use of this technique suggests this has the effect on the reader. So there are some sentence starters there that will help you, but let's have a look at what the examiner has to say. So AQA tells us that stronger candidates are essentially more forensic with their analysis. So they take the text apart. They use the what, how, why structure without fail, but are also exploring how language features impact on the text and the reader. So the reader response is particularly important here. They use a ladder of skills in the mark scheme. So they identify what the aspect of language is. They pick out that quotation. They talk about individual words and they develop that into an analysis. A weaker students don't have this technique. They are not following the what, how, why format. They just pick out meaningless phrases and they say these vague statements that we've talked about before makes them want to read on. You need to focus on what the writer is doing and what words, phrases, techniques and devices they are using within the extract. You need to be confident to use subject terminology as an effective shorthand for what you're trying to write about. You should also remember to exemplify each aspect of language they choose to write about, so talk about it in detail. So what does this look like? Let's have a look on the next slide. So Vest begins his speech by not talking about dogs at all. Instead, he lists all the ways that a man can be betrayed, which adds suspense because the jury is waiting for him to refer to the dog. The repeated modal verbs reinforces the feeling that these dreadful things could happen to anyone. He makes each example sound as awful as possible. His best friend in the world becomes his enemy, which juxtaposes the noun friend, which is effective because. Okay, so I'm not going to read the whole answer, but what you've got here, the things in red, are all the deliberate choices the writer has made. The things in green are very much the effect on the reader and what the intention of the writer was. It wants to sound something like that. Okay, so you're going to have a go at this question now. It's question 3. It's worth 15 minutes. I've given you some sentence starters there to help you. You're only looking at lines 27 to 40, and you're looking at how the writer uses language to describe the cold tips. Pause the video now, set a 15-minute timer, and have a go at that question. Okay, question 4 is worth 16 marks. It's worth 20% of the entire paper. It is a hard question, so I've given you 25 minutes on it, the same as paper 1 question 4, even though it's worth less marks, because it's asking you to compare both sources. You are comparing how they both put across their ideas. This is where I've referenced using your feeling wheels. Okay, so what techniques do they use to put across their ideas and their feelings? You will get bullet points to help you. It's a bit like question 2, but this time you're using technical terms. So you want to use the word writer or the author's name. You want to use what, how, why. You want to use terminology such as the techniques. You want to start by considering whether the writer feels positively or negatively about the topic, picking out what is their feeling, their attitude, and look for shifts. And you want to be able to compare that to the writer, the other writer in the other text. So you should be used to this by now. You've got in the orange box what the question is asking you to do. You've got in the purple that you are looking at perspectives, attitudes and ideas, and you want to identify and comment on methods. You're comparing the different feelings. You've got 25 minutes, so you've got time to plan this response. So you can talk about language and structure here. So the language techniques, maybe things that you picked out in question 3. And you can also talk about structural techniques. These are the techniques that you pick up from paper 1, question 3. So you can talk about language or structure here, whatever pops out to you. I've referenced before that you can use the emotion wheel that we've seen before in class, just in case you've forgotten what that looks like. There are some examples here on the screen for you to look at. So for example, if you are saying that the writer feels very sad, look at the synonyms for sad there. The writer's feeling lonely, vulnerable, isolated, abandoned. Try and narrow down the writer's feelings there. If that's too many words for you, this brighter coloured emotion wheel might be much more simplistic for you. So you should use that to pick out the ideas and feelings from question 4, for question 4. Okay, so here are some sentence starters to help you. So you want to make a comparison point. So the writer of source A thinks this, whereas the writer of source B feels that. You then want to use your evidence for A. The writer of source A describes, put in your quote, by using this technique, it shows that. Similarly, in contrast, the author of source B writer says this, by using this technique, it suggests that. Some nice basic sentence starters there if you need them. So just a reminder, focus on the methods used. You can always talk about tone, remember, we've mentioned that before. You can talk about tone if you're struggling. Okay, you can talk about the difference in perspectives, the difference in the style that they're writing in. You can talk about pronouns. You want to pick 3 or 4 main differences or similarities depending on what the question is asking to you, and that's going to structure your response. Okay, so you can pause the video now to look at the differences between these 2 responses. The one in the purple box is very straightforward. It's only using content and AO1, but you can see the box in blue, there's very much the detailed technical analysis there. So pause the video now and have a look at that if you wish. So what does AQA say? Stronger candidates have a good grasp of the different viewpoints in the text. Students don't need to write about every aspect of the text. Keep to a crisp, clear comparison of 3 central ideas, views with and support and methods. So you can talk about the structure, identify the ideas and viewpoints, support with quotes, draw out the methods used to compare them. Weaker students can identify ideas in the text and support them, but do not necessarily identify the view or the point of view of the writer. Topic sentence must be about the writer's perspective, point of view, supported with quotations and explained with methods they use to put them across. Okay, so here's the question. You want to pause the video now and spend about 25 minutes on this. There are some keywords at the bottom, again, to help you. So remember, you talk about the whole of source A with the whole of source B. You're comparing their attitudes, ideas, perspectives to do with the event. So source A, the disaster in Aberfan. Source B, the earthquake or whatever natural disaster it was. Okay, section B, writing. I have done a detailed masterclass on that you might want to refer to, but let's have a quick look at some things that we need to know. So question 5 is the argumentative one. It's worth 40% or 50% of the entire paper. You must complete it. You get 45 minutes traditionally. I have lowered that to 40 this year. It includes planning and checking time. You want to spend about 5 minutes planning and checking and about 30 minutes writing. You've given you a bit of buffer room there. You are being tested on AO5, which is worth 25 marks, your ability to write clearly, effectively and imaginatively, to write in a tone and style that's appropriate, and to organise your ideas clearly into paragraphs. If you follow my masterclass, that shouldn't be a problem. And your ability to use a range of vocab, sentence structures for effect, accurate spelling and a wide range of punctuation. Again, if you're using my sentence starters that are on the masterclass video, you should be all right with that. So my top tips: engage the reader, start imaginatively, use a rhetorical question, involve your reader in your response, try and use a variety of punctuation types, sentence lengths and paragraph lengths. You need to be using at least 6 types of punctuation. You want to vary how you start your sentences, start with an ly word, an ing word, a rhetorical question. Make sure you're not shifting your tenses. Opening your sentences, remember your first sentence, you're establishing your viewpoint. It's the first thing the examiner would read. It needs to be good. Address your audience in every paragraph. Imagine if we together should do this. I think that you involve your examiner and the reader. Use ambitious vocab. Remember, got is not a word. Avoid being too boring and safe. Avoid cliches. Don't forget about paragraphs. Okay, use impressive word choices, even if you can't spell them 100%. Just give it a good go. So you will get a statement at the start of the question that will set out a clear audience, purpose and form. It will always be quite controversial and you will always be asked to offer your opinion. It's always argumentative, but it could be different varieties of writing to argue. This is the advice from AQA. Strong candidates are able to recognise and sustain an appropriate register and purpose of this task. Candidates in the top level mostly adopted an adult viewpoint, writing with maturity that reflected the perspective they had chosen. Some weaker candidates use devices for the sake of including them, rather than thinking about how appropriate they are for the point they were making. In some cases, candidates lapse into a rant style of writing with a tone that is indignant rather than mature and persuasive. Be so careful about this. The statement, could be controversial. You're not writing as a teenager. Your first thought is not necessarily a good one. Remember who you're writing to. Your audience is an adult one. Make sure that it's appropriate. Candidates achieving high marks this question are bold and firm in their arguments. They don't keep saying, on the other hand, I understand. On the other hand, I get why. You were right. Everybody else is wrong. You can acknowledge the counter argument, but you use it to strengthen your argument. You say the opposition might say this, but this is ridiculous because. The best candidates use devices appropriately and for impact. and they link their ideas seamlessly from one paragraph to the next. So paragraphing is key. Okay, so here is the question. Floods, earthquakes, hurricanes and landslides. We see more and more reports of environmental disasters affecting the world and its people every day. Write the text of a speech for a debate at your school or college in which you persuade young people to take more responsibility for protecting the environment. Year 11, turn this into an article. Write the text of an article in which you persuade young people to take more responsibility, because you will definitely be writing an article. And then on this slide, you can see the sentence starters that we have been using all the way through. So pause the video now and have a go at that task.